to Newcastle, PIF have held talks with 777 about acquiring a club, potentially, going into this multi-club model that we've seen benefit a lot of clubs in England, specifically, obviously, Chelsea, Manchester City. Is this something you think that could really benefit Newcastle as they kind of continue to rise back to prominence and become, hopefully, for their fans, a title-challenging team in the future?
Well, I remember quite clearly that at the time PIF took over Newcastle, that they had looked at buying the whole of 7-7 at that time. This is way before 777 were in trouble and became sort of the pariahs of football in many ways, because Newcastle's thought was, or the PIF's thought was, why start building a multi-club organisation? We can just buy one that's already made. And that was like a big, bold thought. It didn't happen for whatever reason, and they're now looking at perhaps one of the clubs. I mean, there are some decent clubs within the 777 portfolio, but nearly all of them have got some sort of scar of having the attachment to 777. But Newcastle in a multi-club situation, there are so many factors that have to be taken into account around the whole Saudi situation, with the PIF now owning 75% of the top 4 clubs in Saudi as well. How would you start to work on a multi-club situation with not just Newcastle, but with then how would that affect the 4 clubs? Which ones of those clubs would benefit from working with other clubs in a multi-club organisation? There are a lot of questions to be resolved there. And so we'd have to see how it goes forward. But I've always believed that, yes, that there should be a multi-club group developing out of Newcastle, but how that fits in with the PIF investments in Saudi is the big question. But I think there will be some movement, but they're going to take their time. They've been very clever in the way they've analysed things so far, so I don't expect a big rush. And as for a 777 club, I don't know which one it would be. We'd have to wait and see which ones look to be the right fit. But as I say, there's a lot of politics to fit in there as well.
For sure, and you mentioned obviously PIF and all of the clubs that they have an ownership stake of in Saudi, and how massive that would be for Newcastle. We've seen a lot in the past couple of years since the Saudi League became a little bit more prominent, where older players are kind of going for much larger fees than you'd expect to Saudi, and obviously with all the massive PSR changes going on in England, how beneficial would that be to a club like Newcastle, who do like to spend big, having the opportunity to kind of get some dead weight off for much more than what we're expecting to see if they were sold to, a club in Europe?
Well, Saudi has come out very strongly in the last couple of months saying that they're not going to be a dumping ground for older players. They're very clear the age group they want, and they're going after much younger players now. So I don't necessarily think it's that easy to be able, for the clubs like Newcastle to be able to say, right, somebody at the end of their major contract, we're going to, realise a very good transfer fee for them. It ain't going to happen anymore in Saudi because they want to get their age group down in the league as well, which is quite right. So, I think there may be some big transfers still this summer in Saudi. We're not going to see like the old superstars like Ronaldo perhaps going down to play. There's only one Ronaldo really, and they've had that chance, and he's done his job for the Saudi Premier League. There's no doubt. But I don't think we're going to see many of that type of players going down there. There may be one or two, but not a whole movement and a dumping ground like people would expect.
And on the buying front for Newcastle, they're obviously linked with a £60 million move for Marc Guehi after a spectacular Euros performance for him with England. Are they still worried about PSR issues? Because, of course, we were told they needed to sell before the deadline. And that's a pretty big spending before a deadline that's approaching rather quickly.
Yeah, look, I think they're going to be okay this year for PSR, but they're going to have to balance the books, as you say, for this year going forward, this season going forward. So there may be some sales they're thinking about, either in the January window or potentially right at the end of the season. That's probably how they're thinking about it. But I think Guehi would be a great acquisition for them. I think he would fit very well into Eddie Howe's team. So I think it's one of those that they're okay at the moment, numbers-wise. But as the season goes on, they're thinking about how they're going to divest to be able to cover him at the end of the season. So that's how I think they'd be looking at it. But I think if they get him, it would make Eddie Howe very happy, and I think it would improve their squad.